Hey all, Hello here. The 6.5 trailer is out, and boy is it looking like a wild ride. It seems to be going about the way we'd expect from the thread set up so far, but why don't we dive in and analyze what's going on and see what we might find out, and what references, new and old, we can see. Rather than going in strict chronological order, I'm going to break this up into segments, as a lot of the beats in the MSQ are broken up by Myths of the Realm, the Variant Dungeon, and more, but you can find whichever segment you want in the timeline down below. Let's start at the start, with what seems like a dungeon. The opening shot is what appears to be Baron Castle from Final Fantasy IV. We know the world of the 13th is heavily inspired by that game, and the music playing in the background is even the Red Wings theme, which were the knights of Baron's Air Force, and were led by Cecil, or Cecil, and then later by Golbez. The flying colors being red double down on all these ideas, as well as who we see next. Clearly, this is a vision before the Flood of Darkness and the fall of the 13th, and later on there's a shot with us moving through it like a dungeon, with Durante, and presumably Golbez, not our Golbez, who's Durante, but the Golbez before the current Golbez, that is Durante, who took the title Golbez so that the savior of the world would be known as Golbez, which was his friend's name, in honor of him. Yeah, I know it's confusing, and so far, I'm not sure what they're meaning to do with this changing of identity, but we'll see. It's also possible that it's not Golbez, as the armor that we see means that it could very well just be the king of Baron, or some other member. Anyways, we see them aiding us against the invading forces. You can tell Durante by his hair and greatsword, and while we only experience the original Golbez's view first person, when we see it from Zero's, it's clear the original Golbez wore the armor of the current one. So the armor doesn't actually match, like I said. It could be the king, or it could be Cecil. His sword and shield would make him fit as the Cecil parallel from Final Fantasy IV, and the golden armor also matches the original sprite, even if not the Amano artwork. On the topic of old G Golbez, the main character vibe mixed with their lack of normal written dialogue and voicing also has me wondering if they aren't meant to be the 13th's Warrior of Light reflection shard. Them being trapped in Memoria would help the lore and story not to have to answer what would happen if part of the Warrior of Light became a Void Sent. Now, we don't have to have a reflection shard of the Warrior of Light in every story, but there is at least evidence to think this might be the case. But back to the moment in the trailer. There's a soft effect going on in the shot that doesn't look like the echo, but does imply that this might be some kind of vision or visiting of someone's memories. It could be Durante's, Golbez of the present day, I know, it's confusing. Or it could be seen in the memories of the Memoria we grabbed last patch. Even though in 6.4, Zero seems to have dropped it into the lunar subterrane, we may find it as we venture through in 6.5. Either way, unless we're getting two dungeons, or it's a duty, which would be odd due to Y'shtola, Estinian, and Varshan being present, it's probably part of the lunar subterrane, which we'll get to in a second. The monsters that are being fought are a Zoo, Manticore, and Paisa, and other than the Zoo, I don't really remember the others being in 4, but feel free to tell me where if you know in the comments. One thing that would be interesting is that if this is Baron in a dungeon, that one of the bosses could be Baigen, the monster general. One boss we do see though is the Antline, which is in the original Final Fantasy IV. We've also seen it as a boss in Cutter's Cry in Final Fantasy XIV, and it's making a comeback both here and in the Red Sands, the new crystalline conflict zone. Part of me hopes this is actually a second dungeon all its own, but time will tell. Moving on. The lunar subterranean we see more of later in the trailer, and just like the screenshots we saw at FanFest, it matches the final dungeon of Final Fantasy IV in style, complete with the teleporters and everything. Though the rock formations remind me of Deaspected Crystal or of Aurosite, which would go along with the idea of reliving memories. It's almost certainly what lies beneath the opening crack in the Red Moon in the 13th, and descends down beneath Golbez's dark throne towards the moon's heart, where Zodiark's shard would have once resided, like those that did on the Source, and where we will face off against Zeromus in the Abyssal Fracture. I'd also like to take this second to point out that the game has Golbez say Zeromus, not Zeromus. But the game also has people say words like Bozja as Bozja, 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 and there are a litany of other cases of multiple ways to pronounce. So I beg you, don't correct others, and just say whichever is your fancy, and people will understand you. It's fine. It's really, really fine. The mini-boss shown off in the trailer is Plague, an Ahriman enemy from Final Fantasy IV, but also thanks to the special site, we know we're getting the Dark Elf as another mini-boss. Both are fitting, and I'm praying that there are not a bunch of magnetic-based effects for the Dark Elf, as many of us have seen how much people can struggle to remember opposite charges attract and like charges repel as a mechanic. I mentioned them earlier, but I want to point out the companions again. They shouldn't come as a surprise, based on the people we've been taking with us thus far, and they slot right into the lineup. We have Y'shtola, who has her inter-reflection travel subplot still going on, so she can get back to a certain Runar-shaped boy. We've got Varshan, who needs to save Hydaelyn, Zero, who has the fate of Our and her own world on her mind, and Estinian, who, well, Dragoon got a Dragoon, but more seriously has a long-standing connection to the First Brood. But with all that said, let's move on to the juicier stuff with the MSQ. Well, I'm gonna take this in what I think is the likely chronological order, and cover the voice lines as we go, as they sometimes sync up with events on the screen, and sometimes don't. The first lines we get are from Zero, and with her front and center on the poster, this is clearly her patch.
To become a world where light and darkness are in harmony, where we're not consumed by insatiable hunger, but filled with hope for what we might create together. This is proof that I believe in others. A light that illuminates the way in darkest despair.
Effectively, Zero's story in the patches has been about her learning to trust and to hope, and to not only want to save her world, but to do so without damning another. She refers to a light that is proof she believes in others, and we see light literally manifest from within her, while standing in the fractured abyss where the trial took or will take place. Later on, we see a shot from presumably earlier in the patch of her absorbing light of the empty, in the first with Reen's help. The umbrality of that light aether may be enough to at least break Zeromus' shield, if not help to start to restore a modicum of balance to a small part of the 13th. Speaking of the first and Reen, we see Zero, Reen and the Warrior of Light walk into the plaza of the Crystarium, an event heavily hinted to be the plan in 6.4, and tied to the entire patch's story of cross-reflection travel. The question is, how did Zero get there? You could guess that she made a Void Sent pact with us, or was able to be made into a Memoria for a small period of time, etc, etc. But the weird thing is she is looking up at the Crystal Tower, as if you just arrived in the first, which would imply you got there from outside of the Ocular. There are plenty of ways to explain our arrival. For instance, we know void portals between the 1st and the 13th are a thing from the roll quest, but which solution they will go with will be interesting, and just as interesting to see what Y'shtola does with that knowledge. It also could be that we arrive normally, and Zero's being given a tour by Reen. Look, I'm not saying going to other reflections is going to be the main plot of patches or an expansion right away, but they have gone out of their way to lay the groundwork. What with the current story and M itself's comments. But, seemingly with Reen acting as our guide, we get some lines from her.
Though I've lost my connection to Hydaelyn, I can still manipulate light to a degree. If there is a chance I could save others with that power, then I have to try.
We get confirmation that Reen's oracle powers have weakened with the death of Hydaelyn, but she still can manipulate light. I am going to be very interested to see how they justify Gaia being missing during these events, but hey, I'm sure they'll make up something. Or maybe we'll be lucky and they'll actually include her if you've done Eden. And if you haven't done Eden, go do Eden. It seems the plan is to charge Zero full of umbrality to use against Zeromus. Her special abilities due to her odd birth as a half Void Sent and Memoriate may be the reason for doing this, but presumably there is some reason they are not just using Hydaelyn's crystal or some other bank to store the umbral aether. We know the light of Hydaelyn's crystal is what helped Zero return to a more human form when we arrived in the 13th, but we don't know what such a vast amount of light might do to her physiology, or the long-standing impact it might have towards reverting the 13th's aether-rent lifestream into something that might have a hope of starting to heal itself. It's not possible to transport something like Eden easily between reflections to terraform it in the way the first is currently going through. And the 13th's currently total astral state might make that impossible in the first place. But gradually exchanging umbral and astral aether between 1st and 13th, with Zero as a medium, may, given enough time, see results. We see some old faces with Lena and Beck Lug, the latter of whom may have some really strong ideas about the complex aetherology we are dealing with when it comes to the 13th, if you think back to their role in the 5.x patches. Lena has some of her own lines.
May this light illuminate your way.
A clear wish that we might take the aether that was once a heartbreaking, family-sundering symbol of the first as a gift, that it might save the 13th from the fate the first almost suffered. While the 13th may have suffered a flood of darkness and astrality, and the first a flood of light and umbrality, ultimately, the result would have been the same for the first. After that, we get Vritra soaring over Mare Lamentorum, headed for the Void Gate back to the moon in the 13th. Unsurprisingly, on his back you can make out the Warrior of Light, Zero, Estinian, and Y'shtola. I assume his Varshan body is also on his back. On the other side of the Void Gate, we have Zero holding her hand out and catching flakes of crystal, and this could take place before or after the dungeon and trial. It could be the flakes are from the lunar subterranean and the bits of stone and crystal, but here's what I think they actually are. Since we see Zeromus cracking holes in reality, and we know its ultimate goal is to return to the source, they may be flakes of the very walls between reflections being eaten away by Zeromus's raw astrality. Or maybe it's just umbral moon snow. What we do know is that
somehow Palpatine returned.
Somehow the four fiends returned. Since the Fiends have an encore performance together in Final Fantasy IV, this is a welcome, unsurprising surprise. But with 2 locked away as Memoria and 2 dead in the lifestream of the Source, how Golbez is able to restore them is unclear.
Thus will the way open to the promised land, and the death we have been too long denied. Thus will I, Golbez, bring salvation to all.
Really, this just tells us he's sticking to the plan. He's only able to imagine salvation for his people as death, and at the cost of another star. His story in Zero Story is really just another expression of kind of the broader Endwalker stories. How do you contend with suffering? Do you believe in a better future? Do you hold on to the tiny happinesses and try to make the best of it? Or do you just seek oblivion? Ultimately, Golbez is just not willing to imagine a better future is even possible, or accept help of any kind. And now, Zeramis will tear open a hole in the fabric between Reflections and Source, and allow all the Voidsent to pour out. With that, Zero and Golbez stand physically and ideologically opposed. In one of those moments Final Fantasy XIV has now and again, where it decides to go full Dragon Ball Z, or Shonen, or Magic Girl, or Gundam. And either before or while Zero is facing off against him, Estinian doesn't care why or how the 4 Fiends are back, just that they need to be put down again.
However they came to be, we shall cut a path through them. Is everyone ready?
Ishol is holding back Scarmiglione, and at last we get our first shot of Zeramis in the Abyssal Fracture, and it is just perfect. As the final boss from the original Final Fantasy IV, having it here at the crescendo of Endwalker, an expansion with an enormous amount of Final Fantasy IV references, is fantastic. Its design takes elements from the original, Voidsent, Zodiark, and Dragons, which are all parts of its creation. Zodiark's Aether, the Voidsent of the 13th, the Final Fantasy IV rendition, and Hydaelyn, her physical form and soul. The Abyssal Fracture itself looks a lot like a more astral, voidy version of Zodiark's Arena, which makes sense because it's literally in the same place, just on the 13th rather than the Source, the heart of the moon. In the background, we can even see that Zeramis has managed to cleave a fissure onto the Source at Mare Lamentorum. In a presumably earlier shot chronologically, we got Vritra shouting for his sister to return to him, and roaring.
Hear my voice, and return to me! Hydaelyn!
My hope against hope is that by slaying Zeramis, Hydaelyn's soul can be drawn into him, or contained and saved in some way, as has been foreshadowed. One way may be her eyes. Even if her body is gone, with the first brood being as they are, she might be able to reform herself around her eyes. Or, the Hanish Alchemist might be able to forge her a body, short or long term. The final section dealing with the MSQ as a version of the song, Prologue from Final Fantasy IV, as this story is now acting as the end of one chapter of the history of Atheris and a prologue for what is to come in future days. 6.5 being the finale, this story, and 6.55 being the setup for Dawntrail. The final shot is of Zero drawing the light from within her again. It seems to be taking place around the same time as the prior shot with her in the Abyssal Fracture, but in this shot she has her hat, and because it fades into the poster, I'm wondering if it's even an actual shot from the story. The light, its ultimate purpose beyond breaking the Shroud of Darkness around Zeramis, and its long-term effects on her and the 13th are maybe the most important long-term thing that will come out of this patch for the new world Atheris is looking at. Or at least its relationship with the 13th. That covers pretty much everything in the MSQ section, except for one last thing. Grail and the mysterious letter. We get her looking at that same letter from last patch, and the line,
Oh, did you go there, grandfather? To the Golden City in Tural.
that implies Galuf himself may have visited the New World, Tural being its name, and we know the Golden Throne resides in Tuliolal, but the Golden City may not actually be Tuliolal, it may be somewhere else entirely. Since the students of Baldesion have many interests in many things, especially those understudied, this isn't wildly surprising news, but it is delightful, and helps give Krile even more motivation to go to the New World and join us with our 7.0 journey, which goes along with what we were told by Yoshi P that she would be a major character in the coming expansion. Since we're talking about Lalafels, let's talk about Alo Alo, the new variant dungeon. Technically, they still have not confirmed that Alo Alo is in the South Sea Isles, but there was a metric ton of evidence, and now there is just even more, including putting a Lalafell White Mage front and center of every shot dealing with Alo Alo. For those of you who don't know, the Plainsfolk Lalafell initially hailed from the South Sea Isles. One new thing we see, though, is a pixie. With a gun. This is an aesthetic I did not know that I needed. For real though, the first shot in the trailer we get of the variant dungeon is us rising up from underground, in one of the routes, presumably. It's noted that some of the Lalafell of the South Sea Isles may have lived underground in burrows for safety, and this might be hearkening to that. It could also be where the pixie fight takes place, as it looks like a domicile with gifts in the corner, stairs to the outside, and a manufactured floor. The tree-like look could also mean that it's a treehouse sort of arrangement, with the house up above the ground. We see plenty of trees with the glowing tiki arena, as well as this guy, who just looks cool. Loosely, the South Sea Isles are supposed to have a Polynesian vibe, and I love some of the inspirations they're taking. The only other monster we see looks like what happened if a Colossus from Shadow of the Colossus and a Venusaur had a baby, and again, I am here for it. And this archipelago vibe helps further cement this location of the South Sea Isles, which, thanks to FanFest, we even now know is soon to be labeled on our map. Oh, I glossed over something while I was focusing on the pixie and their gun. We don't actually know that the being is the same kind of pixie as those in the first, and I'd even say that it's likely that it's not, but what is will be interesting to find out, and to see where there are and aren't links. But before we hit the last major subject for this video, let's deal with some of the ancillary bits and bobs. We have shots of the trial with Asura that was released at FanFest, and having played it, I can tell you the trial is a blast. Get ready to move in and out of rings, and to pay attention to which face is where, in order to dodge the sword strokes. We still don't know where Asura comes in, but while I was at FanFest, I took the time to look around, and it's clearly Thavnair, based on every element I saw. It's titled The Gilded Araya also might be a nod to the Gilded theme of 7.0. The question is, how do we unlock it? Manderville might be one road, maybe this time they eschewed Greg for a more traditional fight. Alternatively, maybe it's its own little quest, or tied to something else altogether, like Memoria Misera from Shadowbringers. Speaking of Hildebrand, we get a bit of him and Brandahild, but I can't say there is anything to really say, other than I'm glad the PS1 looking genius is making his triumphant return. Besides, it's Hildebrand. Whatever I tried to guess that happened before or after, based on a reasonable context, would be wrong. Only insanity can be assumed. We got a bit of Island Sanctuary with lovely new buildings and water features. There's shots of the Red Sands, the new Crystalline Conflict map that, based on its design, probably takes place in or south of the Sigoli, in geographic space. The mechanics seem hella fun, and there was an Antlion Queen showed off in the live letter, but here we see a Luna Tender, and I have no clue how one could have found their way down from the moon unless they happened to catch a ride. Are they now importing moon creatures for PvP? A few shots of Scala thanks to duty support being complete and the free trial now being extended all the way through Stormblood patch content. So we can no longer say, did you know that the critically acclaimed MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV has a free trial that includes the entirety of A Realm Reborn and the award-winning Heavensward expansion up to level 60? Rest in peace, meme. And long live, did you know the critically acclaimed MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV has a free trial and includes the entirety of A Realm Reborn, the award-winning Heavensward, and Divisive Stormblood expansion up to level 70? But back to Scala. The only really interesting thing to note here is that since Alphino and Arnvald can join you, that means that they will change the original cutscene and dialogue where they explain why they aren't with you and fall through the ceiling after you finish the dungeon, while seeking you out. And at the end of these various stubs of shots, we have the ones with the stubby tails, a shot from the Alliance tribal quest with Dreaming Way and Counseling Way watching some kind of footage of the Peacekeeper and Rala from the Dead Ends, a dragon from Astrakhan Deca Octo, and a Moonhopper flying through Ultima Thule away from the Ragnarok. Having loved the past Alliance tribes, I'm sure this one will end up being a hoot. Or a hop, if you will. Don't miss out and make sure you check out the tribal quests if you haven't already. You've got plenty of time to do them before Dawn Trail. Okay, last but not least, I have one question for you. Who's ready to jam?
May this light illuminate your way.
That's right, it's Mists of the Realm time, baby! For most of these shots, we get a banger rendition of Part of Radiance, the musical theme from Agalea. It may be mixed in with parts from Rhythm of the Realm, but I can't fully pick them out. And I'm hoping that Thalia isn't just a medley of past songs, because there are just too many rich musical ideas for Thaliak, Limlane, and Oshan for them not to do something new. Thaliak with music of Sharlayan, Limlane with a Seawolf shanty, and Oshan with a melody to mountains and the Nimians. The first shot we get of Thalia is of Limlane as a whirling dervish with her trident. One problem. As a god of wind, Limlane should be in the heaven of wind, but is surrounded by torrents of water. That is easily fixed though, since I think we are in the heaven of wind. And I think we're about to pull a Moses while moving through about half of it. We know in lore that windy seas and mountains are the elements that make up the heaven of wind. We can see that from this vista. Making our way down from here and into the sea, as it parts just to fight the goddess of the sea, seems to track, and the water might also just happen to collapse behind us as well, like we see here. You can even see the goddess. We also have Limlane with 2 serpents, and I'm kind of praying that these are a reference to Thalos, a legendary sea creature that we may or may not have seen in 1.0. But back to the beginning of Thalia is the Heaven of Water, which, like all the other heavens, is gorgeous. We can see Thaliak's ewer pouring water, making the watery road we walk, and the buildings all around are inspired, or were inspired, by Sharlayan architecture. The reason I can't say which is because from what we know of the 12, their shape and form is dictated by the prayers of the people. With Thaliak, the patron of Sharlayan, the buildings and even the Nautilus iconography may have only come into being in the Heaven of Water after it was a thing in Sharlayan. Alternatively, we have the 12 are known to be seen at times during and after Umbral calamities. It could be that Nyunkrumph, the founder of Sharlayan himself, bore witness to Thaliak in Eorzea before he sailed out to the islands that would play home to the new nation of Sharlayan. Either way, 2 elements of interest are the building toppers of Mandragora and Tomberries. I can't say I know why the Mandragora are here, other than a random guess having to do with the Aquapolis or Island Sanctuary, but I do know that I spent far too long reading about their lore and the soap opera level story that has to do with their background in Final Fantasy XIV. Also, there is a Mandra Empire on an island to the west of Eorzea, and I am praying that it is something we see in 7.0. With Tomberries, I'm also a little unsure why they're here, but for different reasons. Tomberries are associated with the Wanderer's Palace and with Nim, the Wanderer's Palace literally being named after Oshan and carrying his symbol everywhere. I would have thought their image in the Heaven of Wind would have made more sense, but Nim's existence on the waters around Lenosia and strong connection with sailing, as well as Limlane herself playing as an in-between for wind and water, means that it may have just been a more convenient place to place them. And now on to the nerd himself, Thaliak. Literally surrounded by mathematic formulae and some attacks that are going to require some on-the-fly geometry, he's the god you would expect as the patron of Sharlayan. Interestingly, he looks distinctly more Hurrian than Elazin, but most of the gods have looked more Hurrian than anything else, so I guess that follows. Another problem I have is that thanks to Nymea being with Althik for the Heaven of Earth, there is one god missing from Thalia. So after Oshan, who was our final fight? Would love to hear your theories down below, because on my end, I am stumped. What could effectively have been the 13th member of Vinod's Convocation of 14 and the secret boss, we know actually to be the Watcher, so unless some form of them is stepping in, it would have to be something wholly original. Perhaps whatever's behind the final gate. But since we mentioned Oshan, let's talk about his fight. After all, he is the embodiment of the Wanderer, and he could be Derek, or the Opo Opo, or something else altogether like both. After all, he does make copies of himself in the fight. Either way, get ready for frenetic combat. For our last bit, let's listen to the voice lines that the 12 gave us as they all assemble in a circle, matching the 12's wheel we have had for over 10 years, and, for the most part, the order we fought them in.
Ever has mankind hoped and prayed. And those hopes and prayers have given us fall. Unto the star, we surrender our all.
For countless generations has mankind hoped and prayed for salvation, and that prayer helped give the 12 form. Whether they are shaped in part by the people who gave themselves to make Hydaelyn, like multiple quests highly imply, or are purely just formed from our wishes, they now seek to give their all in service to the star. What that implies to me is that the 12 will be no more after the end of Myths of the Realm, and that a gift to man might be bestowed in their place. The final gate in the Omphalos awaits. What wonder might we discover next? Okay, but I'm gonna call it there. I could talk on and on, but I'm already later to get this out than I'd like. Regardless, what do you think? Did you like the trailer? Are you excited for 6.5? Have any fun theories you care to tell? Why not share them down below? And in the meantime, stay safe, Archons. And thanks for watching. Wait. I'm typically bad at this, but I should try it now and then. I don't take ads for this channel, but I could use your support. And if you'd like to help support the channel, there are a few things you can do. One is, well, watch our videos, old and new. Another is checking out our Patreon. Giving a few dollars goes a long way and gets you things like your name in the credits. Last but not least, if you're looking for a place to play with other Final Fantasy XIV players and want to talk about the game and the lore and join fun events, why not check out our Discord? Links down below in the description. Okay, now I'm actually done. See ya, Archons. Hey all, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, praise the 12 by giving it a like and comment, or by subscribing. It goes a long way to helping the channel. Don't forget, new videos every week, and if you want to engage with us further, why not check out our Discord and Patreon in the link below and become a part of our community. With that said, see you around, fellow Archons.